It was only a tropical storm. Within a single day of forming, forecasters had already downgraded it. The danger, it seemed, had passed. And then Tropical Storm Arthur stalled over the Gulf Coast and dropped close to a year's worth of rain in a single day, breaking a record that had stood for more than 60 years. This is how the storm nobody feared became one of the most destructive of the season. Arthur formed in the Gulf of Mexico on June 16, 2026, earning its place as the first named storm of the Atlantic hurricane season. The system drifted toward the Texas coast with maximum sustained winds barely reaching 40 miles per hour. By early afternoon, its poorly defined center crossed the shoreline near Matagorda County, just down the coast from Galveston. The National Hurricane Center tracked the circulation, but from the start, the warning sounded muted. Strong upper-level winds shredded the storm's structure almost as soon as it touched land. Within hours, Arthur lost its grip as a tropical cyclone. By evening, official bulletins had already downgraded it to a post-tropical low. Forecasters pointed to the loss of organized winds and a center so ragged it barely registered on satellite. On paper, Arthur looked finished. The season's first named threat had fizzled out in less than a day, leaving behind only a swirl of clouds and scattered rain. News outlets repeated the official line: the danger had passed. But the atmosphere over the Gulf was still loaded with tropical moisture, and the system's remnants had not finished their work. The sense of relief would prove short-lived. Arthur's remnants did not move on. Instead, the low drifted over the Gulf Coast and stalled, locked in place by a stubborn ridge of high pressure to the north and a lingering frontal boundary along the shoreline. The storm's winds had faded, but the air was still thick with tropical moisture. In southeastern Louisiana, rain began to fall with a persistence that defied the forecast. Hour after hour, bands of heavy precipitation swept over the same towns, reforming and doubling back, refusing to let up. Meteorologists call this backbuilding, storms that regenerate over one spot, pouring water faster than the ground or the rivers can carry it away. By the early hours of June 18th, rainfall rates surged to around 3 inches per hour in parts of Louisiana. Streets disappeared beneath rising water. In some parishes, the total climb passed a foot in less than a day. In others, it approached 20 inches before sunrise. Roads vanished, fields became lakes, and drainage systems, built for ordinary storms, were quickly outmatched. The Weather Prediction Center, the nation's lead agency for flood forecasting, raised its alert to the highest possible level. A level 4 out of 4, high-risk flood threat was issued for southern Mississippi, southern Alabama, and the western Florida Panhandle. This is a rare step reserved for events expected to bring widespread and potentially life-threatening flash floods. The wording in official bulletins grew urgent, even as the system itself still looked weak by wind standards. The paradox deepened. A storm that had lost its name was now the focus of the nation's most serious flood warnings. Totals kept rising. Many communities saw more than a foot of rain in less than 24 hours. In some places, the numbers would break records that had stood for generations. And all of it was unfolding under the radar, a so-called weak storm, dismissed by many, now turning ordinary neighborhoods into disaster zones. Cottonport, Louisiana, became the epicenter of something no one saw coming. On June 18th, a volunteer observer for the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network recorded a rainfall total that defied every expectation: 29.06 inches in just 24 hours. Not an estimate, not a rounding error. 29.06. It is a number that sits heavy in the record books, a figure that now stands as the most rain ever measured in a single day anywhere in Louisiana. The previous state record, set in Hackberry back in 1962, was 22 inches even. That mark had survived for more than 6 decades, through hurricanes, tropical storms, and countless summer downpours. Arthur, dismissed by many as a spent system, surpassed it by more than 7 inches in a single, relentless stretch. The rain did not fall all at once. Instead, it came in waves, hour after hour, bands of moisture circling back, refusing to move on. By dawn, creeks had spilled over their banks and the landscape around Cottonport was transformed. Fields became lakes, roads vanished. The ground, already saturated, could do nothing but surrender. For the people living through it, the numbers only told part of the story. Michelle Dupre, watching the storm from her porch in Houma, struggled to put the experience into words. She said, "The thunder was so loud it felt like the whole sky was cracking open. And the lightning, honestly, it was like hell broke open all over our neighborhood. I've never heard anything like it." That feeling of something unleashed, of a force far beyond the usual Gulf Coast storm, echoed across the region. Cottonport's 29.06 inches became a new line in Louisiana's history, a stark reminder that a weak storm on paper can still rewrite the rules on the ground. In Avoyelles Parish, the rain did not just break records, it broke routines, boundaries, and the sense of safety that comes from living above the floodplain. Plaucheville and Moreauville, two small towns set in the heart of Louisiana, became islands overnight. Water rose fast, streets disappeared, familiar yards turned to lakes. More than 100 homes in these two towns alone took on water, some with flood lines reaching the windows, others with water lapping at the kitchen counters. Across the parish, the count climbed to around 200 flooded houses. Cars floated down main roads carried by currents that had no business running through neighborhoods. Pickup trucks, sedans, even the occasional farm tractor, all swept off their usual paths, left bobbing in the brown water. In Plaucheville, families watched helplessly as their possessions drifted away, knowing that rescue might come by boat, if it came at all. Boats became lifelines. In some places, they were the only way in or out, as driveways and highways vanished beneath the flood. The stories that surfaced were quiet but heavy. A mother carrying her child through waist-deep water. Neighbors forming chains to pass sandbags or to steady someone crossing a porch that had become a dock. The Red Cross opened a shelter in Moreauville, but many stayed put, waiting for the water to fall, counting losses they could not yet measure. The scale was stunning, the surprise absolute. This was not the aftermath of a hurricane, but the work of a storm most had already dismissed. The floodwaters did not respect state lines. As Arthur's remnants drifted east, Mississippi faced its own crisis. The Biloxi River, usually calm, surged to nearly 30 feet above its typical level. Water crept into neighborhoods that had never seen it before, forcing families to climb onto roofs or wade through chest-deep currents. Rescue crews, including local firefighters and volunteers, pulled around 38 people from flooded homes and stranded vehicles. Some rescues involved entire families, others a single kayaker pinned against a porch, all carried out in a steady rain that refused to let up. Further south, the Jourdain River overflowed its banks near Kiln. Streets disappeared under muddy water. Homes went under, and a state highway became impassable, cutting off entire communities until the water receded. The sense of emergency spread quickly. What began as a Louisiana disaster was now a regional ordeal. In every flooded town, the story was the same. A storm that looked weak on paper, now unleashing a rescue operation that stretched from riverbanks to highways, testing the limits of every first responder in its path. Rain was not the only danger that arrived with Arthur. As the floodwaters crept higher, another threat spun out of the saturated sky. Tornadoes, hidden inside the bands of the dying storm. Over the course of 2 days, at least 9 confirmed tornadoes touched down across southeast Louisiana and South Mississippi. The National Weather Service would later count as many as 10, each one a sudden burst of violence inside an already chaotic disaster. The strongest tornado tracked more than 12 miles, carving a path nearly 3 football fields wide. Its winds peaked at 105 miles per hour. Along its route, it flipped a boat, snapped mature trees, and shifted a manufactured home off its foundation. In some places, debris was scattered hundreds of yards, leaving scars through neighborhoods that were already fighting rising water. In Avondale, just outside New Orleans, the emergency turned personal. Before dawn, a mobile home was rolled by the wind into a nearby house. 2 people inside were injured, treated at the scene, and later transported to the hospital. The National Weather Service survey teams found the frame of the mobile home twisted and the house it struck badly damaged. Residents described the sound as a freight train. Brief, deafening, gone in seconds, but leaving a mess that would take weeks to clear. Most of these tornadoes were rated EF1, but their timing made them especially dangerous. They struck at night or in the early morning, when warnings are harder to hear and floodwaters already block escape. With every new touchdown, the line between wind and water blurred. Arthur did not deliver its hazards one at a time. Flood, wind, and sudden spinning destruction arrived together, stacking the risks in a storm everyone thought was finished. South of Carriere, Mississippi, a different kind of alarm spread through the rain-soaked neighborhoods. The Anchor Lake Dam, holding back a swollen reservoir, drew the full attention of emergency officials. Water pressed against the spillways, rising higher with every passing hour. About 30 homes downstream were evacuated as a precaution. Officials watched the dam through the night, tracking every inch of water, every sign of strain. For families sent from their homes, the fear was simple. If the dam failed, there would be no time to run. But the structure held. The water crested just below the critical mark, and by morning, the crisis had passed. The dam did its job. Residents returned, shaken but safe, reminded how quickly a weak storm can threaten everything familiar. Power vanished in tens of thousands of homes across the Gulf states as Arthur's rains kept falling. Street lights flickered out from Texas to Mississippi. Utility crews worked through the night, but the outages spread. In the Midwest, a separate line of severe storms cut electricity to more than 130,000 households across Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, and Ohio. The reach of this so-called weak storm extended far beyond the Gulf Coast. In Louisiana, Governor Jeff Landry declared a state of emergency for parishes hit hardest by the floods. Texas moved just as quickly, activating emergency management across 101 counties. Mississippi's governor issued a similar declaration as rivers and creeks kept rising. These actions unlocked resources for search and rescue, shelter, and repairs, but they also underscored the scale of the disaster. The word emergency was not used lightly. In New Orleans, officials pre-positioned boats and set up barricades in low-lying neighborhoods. Sandbag distribution sites opened across the city. Drainage pumps were staffed around the clock. The city braced for water that didn't always come, but the preparation spoke to a lesson learned from storms past. Even a downgraded system can bring catastrophe. The damage was not limited to property and power lines. At least 4 people lost their lives, some caught in floodwaters near Houston, others in Bandera, Texas. The numbers are small compared to the scale of the flooding, but each loss is a reminder that water can be just as deadly as wind. The death toll did not climb into the dozens, but the risk was real, and the outcome could have been worse. Early estimates put the total losses above $100 million. Homes were gutted, businesses shuttered, roads washed out. For many, the cost was measured not just in dollars, but in time, effort, and the slow work of starting over. The paradox held. A storm dismissed as weak on paper had forced the hands of governors, overwhelmed power grids, and left a footprint of damage that would linger long after the water receded. Across the Gulf, the world's largest sporting event unfolded in the shadow of a stalled tropical system. In Houston, the first World Cup match ever played, so close to a tropical cyclone, went ahead as scheduled. The roof of NRG Stadium kept the pitch dry, but outside the mood was uneasy. Fan festivals meant to draw crowds from around the globe were canceled or cut short, their stages left empty in the rain. Streets that should have been filled with music and flags instead echoed with the sound of falling water and distant thunder. Still, the match proceeded indoors, watched by thousands who had come for soccer and found themselves spectators to something stranger, a global celebration colliding with a local disaster. For a few hours, cheers and goals echoed in an arena sealed off from the storm, while just beyond the walls, the city braced for whatever the next band of rain would bring. The contrast hung in the air, ordinary spectacle, extraordinary storm. Today, the paradox remains. A storm dismissed as weak left Cottonport with 29.06 inches of rain in a day, shattering every expectation. Forecasts missed the scale, families paid the price. In Houma, it felt as if hell broke open. The lesson endures. It takes only one slow, underestimated storm to redraw the map of risk. Subscribe for more true stories that weather can write.